The Seventh Tower by Garth Nix. Book 6, The Violet Keystone. Epilogue. The great gate of the castle had been shut for more than 1,000 years. Now the vast gate of golden metal stood open to the dark world beyond. But it was not dark, for in the hall of welcome 1,000 sunstones shone, and out on the road beyond there were scores more sunstones, hundreds of moth lanterns, and many oil-soaked torches burning with blue flames. Tal stood in front of a crowd of chosen and free folk. He was clad in simple white robes rather than violet, though the violet keystone shining on his hand splashed him with color. His natural shadow fell on the floor behind him. Only natural shadows flickered among this gathering, though there were still renegade chosen, their spirit shadows, and free shadows elsewhere in the castle. Opposite Tal, in front of a throng of ice carls, stood Mila. The talons of Danir glowed violet on her fingers, and the crown on her head was newly polished. Her Selski hide armor had been repaired and cleaned, and once more she wore her Merwin hornsword at her side. She also wore a sunstone ring, which shone indigo and was larger than the half-keystone she had given up. "Farewell, at least for a circling," said Mila, clapping her fists together in a gesture to Tal. "Or more, perhaps. We will be busy." Tal nodded in understanding. Though they had saved the veil, it had been temporarily weakened, causing a shift in temperature and changing both the weather and the ice. The pattern of Selski migration had altered, and with that alteration had come many conflicts among the Icecarl clans who had to depart from their traditional routes and hunting grounds. As always, the crones would decide these disputes, but they had asked Mila to assist in their decisions. She would lead a special force of shield maidens and crones who were to circumnavigate the world, ruling on the new boundaries and prerogatives. "I'll be busy too," he sighed. Despite the collapse of the old regime, the vast majority of the chosen had still acclaimed him as emperor. The free folk, led by Crow's brother Benim, who had been cured by the crones, had agreed to that acclamation, provided he was called emperor of the castle, not just the chosen. Tal, mindful of his promise to Crow, had accepted for the time being. Now he had the task of trying to make the new society work. It was a tall order when within the castle there were rebel chosen, recalcitrant chosen who didn't want to do anything useful, former underfolk who couldn't imagine change, and free folk who were bitter and wanted the chosen to serve them or to be punished for their past. "I wish Ebbet," Tal began to say, when he was interrupted by a scrawny, rather stooped Icecarl who seemed to be having difficulty with his face mask. "Wish what?" said the Icecarl, lifting the mask to reveal a familiar long nose. "Wish I'd been bored to death by those Kershkins?" "No," Tal said, embracing his great-uncle. "You know what I wish." Snorted Ebbet. "I'll be back. Couldn't miss this opportunity, you know. There I was, on my last breath, or perhaps the second last breath, I can't be sure, and I thought, if I die now, I'll never see the ice. Besides, there are those crones. I like the sound of them." Tal let Ebbet go, but pressed 2 fingers against his great-uncle's chest. Something moved under the furs, something other than skin and bone. "Ebbet! What can I say?" exclaimed Ebbet. "It wants to come with me. We've been playing Beastmaker, and I'm winning 106 games to 108. The codex beat against Ebbet's chest, and the old man hastily added, "The count is a little in dispute. It could be 106 even." Tal frowned. The codex was too valuable to lose, but there was no guarantee he'd be able to consult it, even if it did stay in the castle. At least if it was with Ebbet, he'd be able to find it when he had to. Besides, Mullen was going to stay in the castle, and several other crones were going to join her as part of a permanent embassy. Tal would be able to communicate with Ebbet and the codex via the crones. And with Mila, too. There would be much to talk about. "Farewell, Mila," said Tal. He held out his wrist, showing the scars of the oaths they had made together. Mila bared her wrist, and they touched scars, cool skin against cool skin. Mila smiled, a smile that Tal had not seen before. He smiled back and looked into her eyes. In their joined gaze, they both saw everything they had been through together, from their meeting on the ice to the fall of Sherikor. Everyone was silent as they stood together. Time ticked over in ice coral breaths and chosen seconds, counted in sparks within their sunstones. Finally, Mila raised her hand, and Tal's fell away. Mila held her hand high above her head. A talon flared, and a violet whip spun overhead, before falling into motes of light as Mila closed her fist and lowered her arm. Ice-crawls shouted, their calls reverberating through the great hall. Then they shouldered their burdens and set out on the long road down the mountain of light, down toward the ice and the living sea of Zelski, down to their wind-born homes, the clan ships of the Ice-Carls. Mila did not look back. Tal watched for a moment, then turned toward the shining sunstones, to the thousands of halls and rooms and corridors of the Chosen and the Free Folk, the people of the castle. But even as friends and strangers alike came to his side to ask questions or beg favors or tell him things, his thoughts were only on one small part of the castle. A suite of rooms with the front door marked by an orange slithelbeast leaping over a 7-pointed star. Beyond that door, his family was together again. His father, Rerum, who had been rescued from the Orange Keystone, was regaining both his sanity and his strength. His mother, Grail, had almost totally recovered from the water spider poison. His brother, Gref, had been cured so rapidly by the crones that he had already gotten into several sorts of minor trouble. And Tal's little sister, Kusi, seemed to have forgotten that anything had happened at all. Tal smiled again, a smile tinged with the weight of memory and responsibility. So much had happened, and so much lay ahead. But everything could wait, thought Tal, as he made his way through the crowd. For Tal Grail Rerum was finally going home, and he had a sunstone.